Okay, Professor O here, coming back with the midterm review part 2. Who were the priestly writers and who were the Yahwist writers? Very simple, bare bones explanation there in the intro to Genesis 1 video. What does it mean to say that Genesis 1 and 2 are broken myth? And why did they use broken myths? And in the same video, you have some indication of their intentions, what they were trying to say, and then an explanation of the older stories that they changed. And why they changed those stories. And why they choose to use the symbols of their time, but with some important adjustments to get their points across. Specifically into the changes they made, we're looking at how they're writing from, the P writers are writing during the Babylonian exile. So I hope you understand that they're going to use the Babylonian story because that's the story that everybody knew. That was the dominant story. They're going to use the framework from that. They want people to understand, okay, we're telling the story about how things came to be. So they're using the story people are familiar with, but they're going to break it, right? They're going to make some important changes to it to reflect a very different vision of God than the one typically held in Babylon. So this video, Genesis 1 and the Babylonian exile, is going to help you understand that. And it'll go into how they got into Babylon, and what life was like for them in Babylon. And how their children were born and raised in Babylon. And why they chose the Enuma Elish as their framework and important questions they had to answer. And then there's a very nice table here to help you with the see the similarities. And then another one to work with the differences. You know, why they changed it, what they were trying to say with these changes. The next question has to do with the early Israelites. And these were the first people to escape the tyranny of the Canaanite city-states, most likely Egypt and maybe some other oppressive places, or to have a shift in lifestyle from independent tribe to come to be seen as part of this larger family of runaways and escaped slaves and rebelled slaves and former marauders and semi-nomadic herders and peasant farmers who walked out on the corrupt societies of the Canaanite city-states and settled in the hills in the pioneer regions in northern Israel. And seeing how this newly revealed God was different from the gods that were taught to them in Canaan and Egypt. Now, these people were not the J writers. I've had some confusion with that in the past. These people were the first Israelites, so they would have formed around 1200 BC. Now, after a couple hundred years of them living together as a tribal people, that's when you had the shifts to a more centralized state with King David. Kind of started with Saul, but then really under David, the tribes kind of became a nation state instead of a voluntary confederation of tribes. So this group would have been like the time of the judges, and you're talking about like 1200 BC to about 1000 BC. So this question has to do with those people. They didn't write. They didn't have a written language. It wasn't until around 1000 BC that's when they developed a written language for the scribes in the royal court, and that's the J writers. So you can think about these as the great great grandparents, parents, grandparents of the generation that produced the J writers. But there was the big shift there. You're going to see these people out in the hills, and these videos, the Israelite origins 1 and 2, they just do a great job of explaining this from that series, The Bible's Buried Secrets. But you also get a nice description in this video, the second creation story, who were the Yah's writers. Now, don't do like some students have done in the past and just come in here and look at this and say, oh, look, here's a video. Who are the Yah's writers? Oh, look, it says right here, they were peasant farmers. Like, okay, no, that is a description of the people who became the 12 tribe of Israel, who in their 6th, 7th generation produced the J writers. They were the royal scribes in the court. Right? So this video describes a whole transition, right? The shift to shifts in society where they went from a rural confederation of tribes into a more central urbanized nation state with a king, right? That is described in that video. So, I mean, you really had to do more on the test than just pick a slide and copy it. Yeah, at least make sure it's the right slide, the appropriate slide if you're going to do that. So this next group of questions then just has to do with Burge's commentary and interpretation of the second creation story. And it's just basically 2 parts of it, right? The Garden of Eden scene in chapters 2, verses 4 to 2:25, and then the fall in 3:1 to 3:24. And those are found in these videos here. Second creation story part 1 and the second creation story part 2. You're going to be fine if you can give me a literal and either a moral and an anagogical from the first one, or a literal or moral or anagogical from the second. Okay, you don't have to do all 3. You're only going to have to do 2 from each section, right? The first part or the second part of that story. And you won't have to give me both moral and anagogical. You'll be able to give me either one. But make sure you include a literal sense for each one. And here's for the real smart people, because you'd be smart enough to know less. Sometimes the literal sense, what the author intended, that has to do with making a moral point, right? So the literal sense, what the authors wanted their audience to understand, could be the moral sense, and it could be the anagogical sense, right? This, the way that the story tells us, shows us how to find true happiness, right? How to find union with God. So if you were sharp, which I know a lot of you are, you could use the same thing for both of these, right? You could say this is the literal sense, it's also the moral sense. That would be impressive because it would show that you really understand what the literal sense means, what the authors intended. Anyway, I've been stopping, I stop and pause this as I go, so I just want to make sure. I think I showed you these videos already. Yes, I believe I did, but now you've seen it twice. Good for you. So this is the last question, and I did dedicate a specific video to it. Basically, on the surface, there are the Bible stories may seem to contradict or conflict with the well-established scientific theories like the Big Bang and evolution via natural selection. But if you understand how to read Scripture, if you understand what the literal sense, what the authors of Genesis intended with their texts, intended by sharing those revelatory stories, I think that you should be able to understand and explain why we as Catholics and other non-literalist Christians believe in both the creation stories in the Bible. We believe that they're true. And we are also free to believe that these well-founded scientific theories like the Big Bang and evolution are also true. And there it is in Module 6, Science and the Creation Stories. And if you don't know, now you know. So I hope you enjoyed this part 2 of our midterm review. This midterm is not easy. Study for it, be ready for it. Have the answers to your questions written out ahead of time, because once you open that midterm module at the time specified, it's going to be very difficult for you to go back and try to look these things up. You just don't have that much time, right? So prepare everything ahead of time based on the modules, and give yourself the time and prepare. Set yourself up to get the grade you want. All right, good luck on the midterm. Study hard.